Good evening, buenas noches, and thank you for tuning in. On behalf of all of us at Books and Books in Miami, Florida, and in partnership with Miami Book Fair, I welcome you to a virtual evening with Dean Karnazes to discuss A Runner's High, My Life in Motion, an endorphin-fueled adventure and a love letter to the sport from one of its most celebrated ambassadors. Dean Karnazes is a two-time New York Times best-selling author and an icon in the running world. He is widely recognized as one of the fittest people on the planet. Time magazine named Dean as one of the top 100 most influential people in the world. An internationally recognized endurance athlete and best-selling author, Dean has pushed his body and mind to inconceivable limits. To moderate tonight's conversation, we're joined by the owner of Books and Books, my boss, Mitchell Kaplan. Mitchell is a Miami Beach native who founded the independent bookstore chain Books and Books in 1982. Go Books and Books. He is the co-founder of Miami Book Fair, a former president of the American Booksellers Association, and the host of the podcast, The Literary Life with Mitchell Kaplan. But mostly, he's a big fan of Dean's, and that's why he's moderating tonight's conversation. Throughout this evening's broadcast, you're invited to ask questions by using the Ask a Question feature at the bottom of the screen, and you can order your copy of A Runner's High from Books and Books below by pressing the green button. We appreciate each and every order and the generous donations from viewers everywhere. And now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guest to the virtual screen. Hi, Mitchell.
Hello, Christina.
And
Hi,
hello, Dean.
Hi, how are you guys?
Welcome, Dean. It was great. It's great to see you this way, if not in person.
Well, Mitchell, I almost DNF'd our book talk. As you saw, we had some technical difficulties, audience, so I'm really glad to be here.
Well, it's great to see you with your Miami t-shirt as well. In fact, it reminds me of the last time you came. It was for the Ultra Marathon Man. And if I remember this correctly, what you did is the way most authors come to our store is in a limo with a guide, that sort of thing, but not Dean. You instead, I think, were staying on Miami Beach and you ran all the way to Coral Gables. Am I right about that?
I did, indeed.
And then you let her run afterwards as well, if I remember.
We did a fun run afterward, yes. Yeah, there's a great running community in your area, as you know, and they're super people.
Well, it's interesting because, other than COVID hitting, you'd be back in Miami and we'd have you in the store again. And what I wanted to start with, I wanted to sort of start at the end of the book. It's a remarkable book. This is the book that we're here for. It's called A Runner's High. And I know all of you are probably on because you're fans of Dean, but I think you'll get to know something a little bit sort of behind the scenes with Dean as well. But what I want to do is start a little bit at the end and talk about what your COVID experience was like as a runner, particularly.
Yeah, well, it was pretty wild. I was actually heading to the airport to fly to Central Asia to host a marathon, the inaugural Uzbekistan marathon. And I literally got a call from the State Department, midway down to driving down to SFO saying, your trip is called off. So that was the start of it all. And obviously I had a pretty full calendar in 2020, and slowly but surely every single race I was supposed to attend got canceled. And a lot of them went to the virtual alternatives. And I did a lot of virtual racing, but a race I was really looking forward to was a 100K here in my backyard called the Miwok 100, which is in Marin County, just north of San Francisco. And I thought, I'm going to do this race just by myself. And I showed up at the starting line around the time of the start, and I ran the course just solo. And it was somewhat of a haunting experience because I was so used to showing up at these certain junctures where there was aid stations set up and, cheering fans and all of that. And I just showed up there and there was just ghosts. There was no one there. And that's when it really sunk in, the magnitude of what we're facing right now.
Well, and you know what I think it also pointed out for me is that whole experience of you running just because you needed to run, and it didn't matter if there was an audience, it didn't matter if you won or lost. It harkened me back to a part of the book where you say, you quote in the Philadelphia gym, that great in the Palestra in the gym in Philadelphia, where it's the great college basketball hall, and there's a statement up there that says, to win the game is great, to play the game is greater, but to love the game is greatest of all. And what's interesting for me is that we're now on the cusp of Independent Bookstore Day, which is tomorrow. And in thinking about this, I can't think of a better person to be there just as we're beginning to celebrate the passions of independent booksellers and booksellers in general. Because like you, I think booksellers also took that road less traveled, which was a road where they followed their passion. And not necessarily financial rewards, not necessarily all the other kinds of rewards, but in reading this book, I understood and understand in many ways what it is we have in common and what you have in common with other people who have their avocation as their vocation. And what it made me think about was in Ultramarathon Man, the book was really telling us how you do what you do in one way or another. In this book, Runner's High, it seems to me that what you're doing is you're telling us why you do what you do. So expand on that a little bit and why this book now.
Well, I mean, I think the question of why we run is not a simple question to answer. Every runner has a story, and every runner knows exactly when they started running. I mean, I can ask any runner, even in that group that I ran to your bookstore from, Miami from, when did you start running? And they will tell you a very poignant moment of when they started running. And I thought, how is running so profoundly influential on a person's life when it's just a very simple act, right? All you're doing is walking at an accelerated clip. But it is very meaningful and it becomes part of your identity. And so I tried to get at the question of, why do I run? It makes no sense, right? In this day and age, there are cars. I could have taken a car to your store, but I chose to run. And I think it speaks to the ease of our life these days. I think that we thought, in the absence of discomfort, if we had every convenience available to us, we'd be happy. And I think in a lot of ways, we're so comfortable, we're miserable. Why do something hard when life is easy? Well, because life is easy. I think that's kind of why I do it. Yeah.
Well, what this book is also doing is it is a mature runner looking back, right? So you're looking back at your career, you're looking back at what you did, and it's also having to come to terms with the fact that you're becoming sort of a more middle-aged runner to a large extent. And yet you're still able to operate at such a high level, which is kind of remarkable. And for those who haven't read the book, the structure of the book is that, Dean takes us through lots of the highlights of his running career, but then it focuses completely on the run that you're doing, which is the great run that is one of the hallmarks of what you've done, and you're trying to do it for the 10th time. And I know it's in Squaw Valley, and I'm blanking on the name of it.
Western States 100
the
mile.
Western States 100-mile run.
Yeah.
So talk about what that felt like and what that feels like, knowing that you can't do everything that you once could do, but yet you're still compelled to do it.
Yeah, I mean, it was somewhat of a conflicted experience running that race, in that, I had performance standards I was hoping to, achieve, and those. I don't want to, I don't want to be a spoiler, but yeah,
no, we won't. But
yeah, I didn't quite hit the mark. But then the other side of me was so proud that 25 years after the first time I ran this race, I'm still possibly going to finish, and it was all of those. It was so many emotions at once, both humility, sucking up my pride. Like, people are passing you, be okay with that. Do the best that you can do, because that's all we can really do is be our own best. So I kind of rejiggered my expectations and just said, don't leave anything on the course. Your goal today is to do whatever it takes to reach the finish line. If you end up in the hospital and taken out on a gurney, so be it, but you're not going to stop until you reach that finish line or you're trucked out of here, in a medic van or something.
But I was also struck by, you can see that all I did was write down quotes from the book, and I just can go over them with you. I mean, along those lines,
right?
What's that?
I said to the audience, this is not a paid endorsement.
No, absolutely it's not.
Thank you.
You say along those lines, you say, governing my body was the easy part. Mastering my mind and spirit was anything but. Talk about that aspect of it.
Well, like many runners, I have tremendous discipline. So I can go running when I don't want to go running. I can force myself to put on my shoes and get out the door. When it comes to some of the issues we're talking about, aging, slowing down, retaining your relevancy or watching that slip away, no amount of disciplined thought can override those things. They have a mind of their own, if you will. And I wasn't so good at controlling these impulses, these self-doubts. As many people, encounter these things, they seem to overwhelm me at times. And I kind of came full circle and realized that, these thoughts are really heavy if you don't run. But if you can run, motion stirs emotion. If you can just get out there and run, as you've been telling people for years, running is so good for your mental health. Use that own prescription on yourself. And I found that running was, helpful in me healing and kind of dealing with these emotions that I couldn't just have disciplined thought to overpower.
So in essence, it's the journey. It's the journey that you find. It's the journey that sustains you, because you write about it so beautifully as you're talking about going over this terrain. And what I liked especially was the way you placed yourself going through these beautiful vistas, and then contrasting it with younger runners who are just zipping by and not spending time looking at the beauty that you were able to look through all the pain that you were suffering.
Yeah, I mean, so ultra marathoning has evolved tremendously over the course of a quarter decade, and it's become much more competitive. And I used to think that running 100 miles kind of said enough. You just ran 100. What else do you need to do? You just ran 100 miles. But now, it's a very competitive sport, and the front runners, I think, are a little bit less concerned with the overall experience of the event, of doing something like running 100 miles through the wilderness versus winning. And, they kind of put the blinders on. To their credit, they kind of have to put the blinders on if they want to compete at that level. But it's changed somewhat. I still think that the majority of the field, the vast majority of the field, is in it for their own experience. They don't think they're going to win. They don't care who wins. They just want to finish themselves. And at the Western states, as I described in the book, finishing is not guaranteed at all. I mean, a good portion of the starters never finish.
Explain. You have to do it within a certain amount of time, right? As well.
Yes. So you have 24 hours to run 100 miles on a wilderness trail through the Sierra Nevada. So there's 16,000 feet of elevation gain and 21,000 feet of descent, of going downhill. And you have 30 hours. And I'll tell you what, the most remarkable thing to watch ever is something that's been coined the golden hour. And that is hour 29 to 30. And for some reason, the vast majority of finishers finish in that final hour. It's almost so the gravitational pull of the finish line draws them in. But watching these people that are on the verge of collapse, doing whatever they can just to get across that finish line before the clock goes off, is so inspirational. I mean, it's a tearjerker. Yeah,
and how many times have you finished?
I finished a dozen times.
A dozen times, which is pretty remarkable. right? I think when you do 10, you get a special award of some sort, and to do a dozen must be extra special. So what I loved about the book was that there were so many kind of interesting highlights, and you tell them so matter of factly. We come to learn, that we all know that Dean ran across America how many times?
I've done it twice in both directions.
Right, and it's easier going east, right, west to east. That I learned.
Otherwise, you've got a headwind. If you're going east to west, it's not a good thing. Yeah.
So talk about what happened when you were coming to the end of your run this last time. I think it was the last time.
Yeah, it was the last time. Yeah. And what did you think about that chapter? Just out of curiosity.
I thought it was great. It took me by. I didn't know what year it was, so I was trying to remember who it might have been that you were going to be seeing at that time.
Yeah.
And I was thrilled that who it was. And then to find out what happened the day before was equally as interesting.
Yeah. So I got an invitation to visit the White House. As I'm running across America, I get a call from someone as I'm approaching D.C. that says there's a person here at the White House who really wants to meet you. Would you mind?
Well, you didn't know it until you were right there, right?
Yeah. No, I thought it was a prank phone call. Like, all right, I'm calling from the White House. And the person said her name is Michelle that wants to meet you. And I'm thinking Michelle, like a sous chef in the the kitchen, or security detail, or so I kind of said, Michelle who? And this voice says, well, her last name is Obama, Michelle Obama. Do you know who she is? I said, yes. I've been running across the country for 65 days, but I know who Michelle Obama is. So I literally ran into the White House and out to the South Lawn, and there was Michelle Obama waiting to greet me. And you have to read the story. I mean, it's absolutely.
Yeah, we don't want to spoil it, but there is a really interesting reason why he did not meet President Obama. You'll have to read the book to find out why that didn't happen.
Well, I met his dog. I met his dog.
You got to meet Bo. I know that you met Bo. And she also took her shoes off, and she was. I love this scene. Here's Dean running. For how long? I don't even remember how long it was, but you hadn't taken a shower, you hadn't bathed, you hadn't shaved. And, he's thinking to himself, what do I do? How do you approach the first lady? And she opens her arms and she does what? She gives you a gigantic hug, right?
Hug. Yeah. And I'm a sweaty runner. I thought that was really big of her, like really courageous.
Yeah, no, it was very, very cool. That was one of the leading up points to all of this as well. Then you also talk about people who influenced you either early on or later on, but people like Tony Hawk and Baird Hamilton, Conrad Anker. Talk about some of those people in your life that had that kind of impact on you and why.
Yeah, these are guys that you just mentioned that are just true to who they are. I mean, before Tony Hawk, who would think you could make a living as a professional skateboarder? But he so loved skateboarding, he made it into his vocation. And it's the same with Laird Hamilton. Laird Hamilton was a competitive surfer, but he didn't like surfing in these small little waves. He thought it was a waste of time. So he just said, I'm going to go ride the waves that I want to ride, which were the biggest, heaviest waves in the world. And he made a career out of it. And the same with Conrad Anker. He was a quote unquote dirtbag climber. He was sleeping on people's couches, living in his van, but he made a very nice living for himself, doing something he loved. And I use that model myself to say, okay, well, you love running. You love ultra running. There's no prize purse in ultra running. I mean, you get a belt buckle, as you mentioned. How are you going to build this into a career and sustain yourself as an ultra marathoner? So I really looked up to those guys and tried to model what I did around some of the lessons I learned from them.
And the other thing about this book, and I'm curious as to what decisions you made. I mean, you were it's a very intimate book about your parents, about your wife, and about your son, Nicholas, and some of the difficulties of parenthood, and also having your spouse, where you basically are gone for a good part of the year running, really. Um, what made you make those decisions to include that in this book?
Well, I'll preface how I answer that question by saying that, hi, Mom and Dad. So my parents, who are in the book, kind of main characters, they're watching they live in San Clemente, California, which it's like Coral Gables, only it's less humid. But
well, I want to say hi, Pops, is what
hi,
you
Pops.
should say,
Yeah, Pops.
right?
Yeah, and as every runner knows, although running is a very solo sport, when you start running, anyone in your life is involved. There's no way they can't be, and it's largely because of your absence. You spend a lot of time out doing something solo, and I thought I have to involve my family because they're such a prominent part of the story, and it would seem incomplete if I didn't. So that's why I included them. Not to mention that Pops is a pretty colorful character, as you probably read. So he added some nice commentary to the book.
Well, actually, you dedicate the book to them. And the dedication for the book says, this book is dedicated to my mother and father, to the times we've had, the memories we've created, and the joy we've shared. It's been a fantastic journey together forever. And the story of their marriage comes across loud and clear, just about how devoted they are to one another. That was a very heartening part of the book as well, I thought.
Well, my dad proposed to my mom within a half an hour of meeting her. Can you imagine?
In those days, you had to do it that way, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're not that old. I mean, they're. My mom's approaching 80. My dad's in his mid 80s.
No, I know.
But I mean, I just can imagine that in this day and age, is meeting someone and falling in love with them, and within a half an hour proposing, and they've been together ever since, and very loyal. They've been through a lot together, good times and hard times, and I think that more than anything, their loyalty to each other is what true love is all about. It's that forever faithful, and they are, and that means a lot to me.
And I think they gave you a sense of a love of the outdoors as well, which is very clear.
Yeah, there were very few rules in my household when I was a young man, and I was free to roam and encouraged to roam. And my dad and I, we used to go camping all the time, and those are some of my fondest childhood memories, is camping with my dad, in the Sierra Nevada of California.
And there's a very touching, scene that moved me quite a lot about your dad's marathon that he ran, in the wake of a tragedy that your family suffered, and how also that brought him comfort and help stabilize things for a little while. The other thing that you're so open about, and as a father of two boys and a girl as well, is your relationship with your son, Nicholas, which I thought was really, really very, very insightful and so accurate as well.
Yeah, I think every parent, when your kid goes off to college, you think you kind of know them, but they're gone for 4 years. And when they come back, you treat them as the person that left. And I learned through Nicholas's actions that he was very much not that same little boy. He was a very capable and able individual. And I never would have given him that leeway had he not crewed for me at the Western States. I was very concerned because he didn't seem to be taking it seriously. And just the opposite was true during race day. He took it very seriously and did an amazing job.
What is Nicholas doing now? He was in college when we meet him in the book. Has he graduated yet?
He graduated last spring, last May, right in the midst of COVID. So he moved back home. He's not too happy about that. My wife and I are very happy because we love having him around. Yeah, he got a job in San Francisco, and he's working away.
Cool. And I know he wasn't a runner, but he was a great football player. He was a great athlete in his own right.
Yeah, he played football, which I don't know. Look at me. I'm 5'8", about 145. I don't know why he chose football, but he's
no. But you explained the fear of football quite,
yes,
quite accurately as well. The other thing that really struck me, not being a runner in that sense, and certainly not being an ultra marathoner or even a marathoner, is I did not realize what happens on the run at all of the way stations. At all, it's like a world unto itself, those way stations. Talk about that a little bit and about what those people mean to you and those interactions.
Yeah, so if you run a marathon, like the Miami Marathon, there are aid stations set up along the course where you can get hydration and some fuel. It's a much different experience during a marathon because you're just kind of running up, grabbing something real quickly, and dashing out. During an ultra marathon, these aid stations are set up in remote locations, and people sometimes spend days bringing supplies into these locations, and then they're like little oases of humanity. So you might be running for 3 or 4 hours, by yourself on a single track trail, and not see another human being, and then you roll up to an aid station,
Right.
There's 10 or 15 people there, and they really make it festive. They really play it up. So a lot of them are themed. I talk about one that's Hawaiian themed,
Right.
and yeah, they make it.
Well, there was one in which I think they were making tacos, right? At one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Mexican food when you're running 100 miles is so good.
That's
They're
great.
making quesadillas, yeah. And how they get a stove and a cast iron skillet out in the middle of nowhere, God bless them.
Well, but then there was the scene with Anne, right? The woman who was the great marathoner, who nobody had. She sort of disappeared, and then she showed up at one of these aid stations, right?
Yes, I mean, Anne Trayson to me was, she was goddess-like. I mean, she won every single race she was in, never came in second, and sometimes she won outright. I mean, beating the men as well. She was always in the top 10, male or female. And when she started getting a little bit older and losing her edge, she didn't announce retirement. She just disappeared. Like Anne was gone. I mean, one day she's running what races, her margins of winning start to creep down a little bit, and then she's gone. And lo and behold, a decade later, as I'm running the Western States, who do I see at one of these aid stations but Anne Trayson? And not only that, she just did such a good job at reviving me. I mean, she was so humble and so cordial, and gave me a pep talk and everything. It was like meeting a hero. I was thunderstruck, and she didn't even realize it. Yeah.
If you can talk just a little bit. You do it so well in the book, but so that the people in the audience can get a sense of it. Talk about what it feels like when you are completely drained, completely wrecked, when you've gone through a valley and the heat is there and you feel like, you just feel like you can't move again. Talk a little bit about that. What happens to your body? What does it feel like?
You feel like you've been in a train wreck. I mean, you just feel every cell of your body is radiating pain. And the best analogy I can come up with where your head goes is watching my wife give, birth to my daughter and my son. I mean, that pain of labor and that kind of, you're almost in another universe. Your mind is somewhere else. That happens to you during an ultramarathon. I mean, you hallucinate, you can fall asleep while you're running, but you're very much in a different place than in an everyday conversation.
Yeah, and you have toward the end, you so artfully weave in the hallucination that you had me believing it. I thought, oh my God, what direction is this book going to go? I mean, it was so beautifully done. So congratulations on that. The other thing that I'm struck with, is just everywhere that you've been and the things that you've seen. I mean, your description of the Silk Road Marathon or the Silk Road Run. Would you talk a little bit about that? That was unbelievable, actually.
It was unbelievable. I was a U.S. athlete ambassador on a sports diplomacy envoy to Central Asia. So I ran 525 kilometers along the ancient Silk Road route between the capitals of Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And that probably means nothing to no one. I mean, I don't think many people could point to Uzbekistan on a map. And I couldn't. I've got to be honest. I mean, I knew it was in Central Asia somewhere, but I went there and just saw a culture that is so different than ours that it was amazing. But then again, we were all linked through running. I mean, thousands of people came out to run with me, and these are not, runners like the U.S. I mean, they're not in, $200 running shoes and, fancy apparel. I mean, these are people, sometimes they're just villagers that just wanted to run alongside me. And we didn't speak the same language. The color of our skin was different. Probably the God we worship is different. Obviously, our language was different. But for a moment in time, we were united. And I think that was the true beauty of the experience.
Yeah, no, that was a real highlight for me to see how you brought people together and how many people knew you while knew what you were doing and knew of you in the middle of Central Europe. Really interesting, I thought. It always seems like you're surprised by that, and I think that humility comes through loud and clear in this book. I mean, people on the trail would yell, "Hey, Karno," and you'd be surprised, and people would want to take pictures with you while you were running your run. And talk about what you think that part of your personality allows you to submerge your ego a little bit.
I think just running in general humbleizes you, right?
Right.
It beats down that ego. It whittles it away. And I guess I just don't see myself as anything other than a runner. And I'm always surprised when a runner, kind of treats me as anything but, as a, quasi-celebrity sort. I'll never get used to it, Mitch. I mean, it's every time someone pulls out a copy of my book and says, "Will you sign this?" I don't think of myself as a writer. I've written a couple books, but I don't qualify as a writer. I mean, that's
yes, you do. I would say you qualify as a writer. Your writing in this is beautiful. Your description is amazing. The intimacy, it's both memoir as well as it appeals to so many different people. It's very cross-genre. There was excitement in it. There was everything in it. So you can call yourself a writer.
Well, I'm a huge fan of yours because I know how much you've got on your plate. I don't know how you were able to read a book amongst everything else you got going. So more power to you. Strength and endurance. You're amazing. Yeah.
Well,
I don't think you sleep is your magic.
I think an insight into Dean, for all of you listening, is a comment he has. It's also an insight into his parents, who I really hope that I get to meet one of these days, because I really fell in love with your parents.
Careful what you ask for, Mitch.
What's
Pops,
that?
I said, careful what you ask for. Pops.
Come on down. The next trip, let them come down. But you have a line that makes so much. I mean, it really is a window into you. We didn't have much when I was a boy. We had everything. Isn't that pretty amazing? I mean, that is, you had enough and you had everything at the same time.
It taught me that the best things in life are not things at all. It's togetherness, it's adventure. And we had California, in its heyday open to us, and we took advantage of it. I mean, we traveled everywhere.
So I have a couple of, before we go to questions, just a couple of questions. Squaw Valley changed its name. So what did they change its name to? They were going to do it this year. Have they done it yet?
No, they haven't established a new name. I think it's going to be something like Olympic Village. But for those of you wondering why would Squaw Valley change its name, squaw is kind of a derogatory term for a female. It's like saying a chick,
right,
in English. So they're going to change the name, I think, appropriately.
And the other thing I was going to ask had to do with you make it very clear that you're going to continue running, that's not something you're giving up at all. You struggle with it. You struggle with it because it's your profession. It's the way you through endorsements, it's what you do. And you're constantly questioning, what if I don't have it? What if it's not there? But where do you see the next chapter of your life going?
I still love running, and I still, have a yearning to race. And so I'm going to continue pursuing running and racing, maybe new locations where I've never been before, new adventures. But I define my finish line as a pine box. I'm 10 feet under, I'll stop. But right now, the passion is burning as as hot as it did when I first started.
Are there any other ways you see of expressing yourself? Any other areas you'd like to see yourself get into?
I want to continue to encourage and hopefully inspire more people to take up running. I think that there's no downside to running. I think the more people that run, the better our society will be. I mean, running humbleizes you, it unites you, it makes you appreciate the environment more. So kind of my goal now is just to get as many people as I can in love with this sport that I love.
So let's talk practically. So let's say that, a 50-year-old, 60-year-old person, 40-year-old person wants to start running. What should they do? What would be a kind of way in? I mean, obviously not to become an ultra marathoner, but if they just want to start running for pleasure.
Yeah, I would say start from the ground up. So invest in a good pair of running shoes. That way, it's more comfortable to run. And also, you'll feel real guilty if you don't run and you just spent $200 on a pair of shoes. The guilt will help get you out the door. But then I would say, don't run for distance, run for duration. You don't need a fancy sports watch. Just try to run for 3 continuous minutes. And I know to a lot of experienced runners, like, well, that didn't begin to warm me up. But for a lot of people, they can't run 3 continuous minutes. They typically sprint out too quickly. And after a minute, they're gassed and they start to walk. So it helps you regulate your pace and finish at 2:59, you should be spent and ready to stop. And once you run for 3 continuous minutes, go to 5 to 10. And then if you can run for 15 continuous minutes, you're ready to start doing distance versus duration. But that's a good way to get into it.
Should you do it every day? Try to run for 3 minutes every other day? What is a good way of starting?
When you're first starting out, I would say 4 days a week is fine. Yeah, and then I would increase to 5 days a week.
Great. Well,
with that, I always say listen to everyone, follow no one. So be inquisitive. Talk to as many people as you can about how to get into it and hear what they say, and then find what works best for you.
What about running groups? Do you find those to be very helpful?
I think you need to look inward. For some people, they like that accountability of a group and they like being around people. They might be a little bit more extroverted. Myself, I prefer running solo, and I know a lot of other runners as well that prefer running solo. So I just think it depends on the constitution of your character.
Well, that's great. Dean, I can't recommend this book enough. A Runner's High. It's something you can buy by just clicking down below and buy it. And I know that one of these days, Dean will be back in Miami, and then you can bring it and he'll sign it for you at that point. But it's time. Why don't we go to some questions? We have some questions here from the audience. Dean, you are amazing. Do you get physical doctor checkups just to make sure all is okay?
Yeah, I do. I monitor my health pretty closely, and there's a company called Inside Tracker that does like a panel for athletes. It looks at some of the the things you want to measure as an athlete. So I do that once every quarter, and everything looks good. I mean, I've got the the physiology of a man much younger than myself. I mean, my biological age and my chronological age are very different.
Yeah, I was on your Instagram. Man, you're in great shape. I'll tell you that much. It's really kind of pretty remarkable. If you lived in Miami, here's someone asking this question. Abby is asking this. If you lived in Miami, where would you train to get hill training? Parking lot ramps and bridges. What else? Thank you so much for another book. I can't wait to read it.
Is that Abby? If that's Abby Ross, where would I stay? I would stay on your couch. She's an old friend of mine. Yeah.
He's great.
I would go into a stadium and run the stairs. That's a good way to get hill training. I know a lot of my friends go down to the Keys and run the bridges. That's, I guess, do what you got to do. But to me, a stadium is a little more abrupt of an uprise. The other thing is that, heat is a poor man's altitude training. So running in the heat and humidity is really good for your cardiovascular development. So I would say, maybe delay your run. You know, if you're used to running really early in the morning before it gets hot, maybe delay your run for an hour so it is a little bit warmer when you go out. But that's a good way to kind of hack your fitness, is run in the heat.
What do you think about people who run on treadmills? What's what's the pros and cons of that?
I think, again, it comes down to the individual. Some people love the convenience and kind of the predictability of a treadmill, and that's where they primarily train. I'm not a big treadmill fan. I prefer the outdoors, but anything that gets you running, I think, is the right thing. Treadmill, or
even though you did, what was that? What's that story about how you were suspended over Times Square or something in a treadmill, or you ran for 100 hours? What? I don't.
Yeah, no, I ran for 24 hours on a treadmill in Times Square. That was on a 2-story platform. I always sit up in the air. Yeah, it was crazy. I ran 135 miles.
Just wild. Let's see. Dean, thank you for sharing your life with us. What is the worst injury you have ever suffered that set you back, and how did you overcome it?
Well, that's an easy question to answer, thankfully. Knock on wood. The worst injury I've ever had is a lost toenail.
Wow.
I've never had an overuse injury, never had a running-related injury. Just, a couple black toes and lost toenails. And I think every runner gets those. It's kind of a badge of honor.
What is your weight training like? What do you do for weight training?
I primarily do body weight training. So push-ups, pull-ups, chair dips, sit-ups, and something called burpees. I don't know if you know what a burpee is. They're horrible, and I love them. But it's basically a kind of a dynamic motion, a burpee. If you don't know, you can just Google it. And I literally roll out of bed and do 25 burpees every day. And wow. I'll tell you, it's really hard to have a bad morning if you start off at 25 burpees.
Oh, people are going to be running to their computers who don't know it. I know I am.
Don't try 25. If you can do 2 or 3 when you first start out, that's pretty good.
If I can do 1, that would probably be pretty good. Have you ever been to a country and have the marathon? Have you ever been to a country and have the marathon be the only way that you saw the country? In other words, have you ever just experienced the country through a marathon?
I've experienced a lot of countries at 6 miles an hour, just running through the country, which I think is a very intimate way to learn a place and learn about the people. When I do a race, like a marathon or something like that, I typically, I bookmark it on either end with some travel or some vacation time, and I kind of run the marathon as part of that. But if answering your question is, running not an actual sanctioned official marathon, but just running through a country, I've done that quite a bit. Yeah, many countries. Haiti. I could go on a long time for countries I've run across.
So you ran across Haiti as well?
Across Haiti.
Wow, what was that like?
Oh, it was heartbreaking. That Haiti is.
Were you invited to be there, or you just decided?
It was a fundraiser, and when I got down there and saw firsthand the situation, especially in some of the rural areas, I was somewhat glad that I was doing what I was doing, but it was very emotional because it's just, I've never seen a country in such dire straits, and I've been to a lot of places. Yeah. Did
you ever, we're in Miami. Did you ever run through Cuba at all? Was that a place you've been?
I'd like to go to Cuba.
All right, something on your bucket list, then. That would be great.
I'll swim there and then crawl out and run.
Here's another question. It's your pal, Will. As someone who's run everywhere, what foods have you picked up in new locales that have become staples in your fueling regimen? You might want to talk a little bit about your diet that you're on as well.
Well, I will tell you, Will is actually in the book. So he's the gentleman from the U.S. Department of State that recruited me to run the Silk Road Marathon.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, a really good guy. And the backstory is, when I first met him, I thought he was a nut. And it was during the San Francisco Marathon, but I couldn't get away from him. He's a pretty good runner. And I thought, just leave him in the dust, and that's the end of that conversation. But he persisted and ended up being a real charming guy. And he was with me during the Silk Road Ultramarathon. He works for the U.S. Department of State. So, one of the things I describe in the book is coming into a village and they had the national drink ready for me to drink.
I remember
running across, Kazakhstan. It's 90 degrees, it's 30, 40 miles into it. And I pull up at the city center and there's thousands of people just so happy to see me. And they hand me a bowl, this, it looks like a half cut coconut with this white liquid inside. And they hand it to me and I'm thinking, oh, it's going to be a pina colada or something cool and refreshing. And I drank it. And it was like the closest thing I can equate it to is like, imagine mixing champagne with sour cream.
Right.
Whipping it up and drinking it. It was a national drink called kumis.
Right.
So it's fermented horse milk, essentially, and warm, and it's served warm like tea. So
there was a lot of horse experiences on that trip, right? Things that you had to eat.
It goes beyond the horse milk, yeah.
Talk about your paleo diet, though, and the diet that is your diet.
Yeah, so I mean, in my first book, I write about ordering a pizza while I was running and having it delivered to me on the run. I don't do that anymore. I've quote unquote cleaned up my diet. So now I just say if I can't pick it from a tree or dig it from the earth or catch it with my hands, I don't eat it. So pretty much everything, raw and unprocessed, unrefined.
Here, I guess someone is asking. It may be one of your sponsors, but they're asking, what shoes do you run in? And do you ever, and the other question is, do you ever change clothes and shoes during a 100-mile run?
Yeah, so I have a number of different types of shoes, trail shoes or road shoes that I run in, depending on the terrain. And I change my shoes. And do me a favor, whoever asked that question, do buy the book. And please buy it through Books and Books. Support your independent bookseller, please. But you'll learn a lot about what happens during an ultramarathon. You do indeed change your clothes, and it can be embarrassing. Exposed places where the sun don't shine, but you do change your shoes and your clothes quite a bit.
And I should say also on your Instagram, you do have pictures of the different shoes that you've worn as well and what they look like after you've run. Let's see. I'm reading, Dean. Oh, look, Abby Ross just sent you a message. She said, yes, it is Abby Ross, and your parents can sleep on our couch too. All right. So we do expect them down here. Dean, I'm reading the book now, and it's wonderful. If you ever write another one, what do you think it would be about? You're very inspiring, and I hope to share footsteps with you sometime.
Yeah, I talk a lot about and thank you for that message. I'm glad you're enjoying the book. And as you know, in the book, I talk a lot about my relationship with my son and my father, but I have an equally endearing and colorful relationship with my mom and my daughter. So we're 100% Greek, and I think there's a story of us traveling through Greece that needs to be told. And Greece is a wonderful country, and yeah, I think that's probably my next book.
No, and your mom comes through lively, and she's from one of the blue zones, right?
Oh, the blue zone, yeah.
Yeah, which is really, really great. All right. Well, this is a good question. This is something that I think a lot of runners do. Do you ever listen to music when you run?
Once in a while. Sometimes I listen to music, and a lot of times I listen to audiobooks. So I've gotten very into audiobooks. I think I have 500 audiobooks on my playlist now.
Wow.
Yeah, if you've ever listened to an audiobook while running, it makes the run go by so smoothly. Yeah, so that's something I do. But once in a while I listen to music. I would say half the time I listen to music. Half the time I run with no music. Half the time I listen to music or an audiobook, and the other half I don't use either.
Dean, one of the quotes, which I think is really, it gets us back to the beginning of what we talked about in terms of passion, It's a quote that's sort of in the middle of the book, where you talk about how and why you stay true to what you're doing. And you write, and I think you're talking about, people like Tony Hawk and others, about how they and you have all stayed true to yourself. And you say, of course, this is never quite as easy as it sounds. Sustaining oneself for multiple decades in a self-constructed livelihood is anything but effortless handiwork. That youthful vigor and enthusiasm that once provided the boundless energy necessary to tackle anything dwindles over time. A once reliable tailwind weakens and occasionally eddies against you. Isn't that what we're all fighting as we get older, as we do what we do?
Yeah, no, I think I said that pretty well. I can't believe I wrote that, because I was like, I'm nodding my head like, yeah, I can relate to whoever wrote that. But yeah, no, I mean, I'm a sales guy in a lot of ways. I mean, I have to work with sponsors and bring in new sponsors. And you've heard about all my successes, but I could write another book about all my failures and all my no's that I hear. I mean, you hear no, and a lot of times you're resilient when you're younger. You bounce off of it, but you start accumulating a lifetime of no's, and it can wear you down. And to me, again, my goal right now is longevity and staying the course. And some days it is exhausting. I mean, Mitch. I mean, you don't own a small business; it owns you. So you know what that's like. I mean, you've done it yourself. You've been in my shoes. Yeah, I've been in your shoes, I should say.
Well, I think the idea is to sort of continue to work on keeping that passion alive, right? As soon as the passion leaves, you ask yourself, why am I doing what I do? Certainly running ultra marathons has to be passion fueled, or else, you talk about the self-doubt that you have almost after every race, right? So unless there's that passion, you would give in to that self-doubt at some point.
Yeah, there has to be something that you're driven toward. I mean, I think it was Thoreau that said, most men live a life of quiet desperation. And I think that's because they didn't pursue their actual passion. They just chose a more conventional path through life. And I don't ever want to be that person.
Well, you make that loud and clear in a runner's high. And I think there's no better way to end this discussion than with a quote from Thoreau, right? I think you'd agree with me. So, Dean, thank you so much. I hope that we can see each other again, really soon. And you can even fly to Miami. You don't have to run to Miami. You can fly to Miami. And you've got lots of couches to stay on. So I wish you, and I know all of us wish you, the most incredible happiness in the days ahead. And is there a run that you're pointing toward right now? Is there something that we should be looking out for?
Well, the COVID gods willing, I'm supposed to run across Australia in August. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
How would we track that? Do you keep, is there a website that we can track what you're doing and that sort of thing?
There will be a website. If you just Google my name, and people say, how do I find you? I think someone said to me that when you Google Dean, I'm the first Dean that pops up.
Great.
Yeah, I've got a website. I'll put it on the website. I've got, as you know, social media. So I'm not hard to find.
All right, Dean. Thank you, and thanks for being part of what we do here at Books and Books. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me on. And like I said, audience members, please support Mitch, support the bookstore, and I hope you enjoy my book.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you very much. And Christina, thank you. Christina's going to come on in a second, I think, if she can get on. Christina, are you there?
She's out for a run.
Yeah, I can get on. I just wasn't sure if I should, but here I am. So I think the key is to endure, right? To endure in everything that we do. And as Mitchell so beautifully stated, with passion. That's the thing. So Dean, you're amazing. What are the shoes that are in back of you? I'm just curious.
So those are bronze shoes from running across America.
Oh my God,
wow.
that is so cool.
You know what these things are? These two things? Those are Olympic torches.
Wow.
They let you keep. I've carried the torch twice, and they let you keep the torch.
Oh, that's
Oh, my
amazing. Where did you carry them? In
One
what
time in San Francisco for 2008 for the Beijing Games, and
Right.
then in 2018, 10 years later, for the South Korean Games, and I carried it in Greece. So I've carried it
Oh,
in
how wonderful.
US and Greece, yes.
Yeah, that's a
Delicious.
beautiful, beautiful setup in the background that you have. How beautiful. Okay, people, so we're gonna do some burpees and we're gonna order some books, okay? And we're gonna see each other soon at Books and Books in the courtyard. And we're gonna do a little running. So thank you so much to everyone for watching, viewers everywhere. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe, be
And
well.
also, I should say, if you want to share this, you can go to our website, and this will be up on our website probably within a day or two, and you will be able to share this event with anybody that you want. So we hope that those of you out there will share it with your friends.
Thank you, Dean. It's been a true, true pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Take
Bye.
care. Have a nice day. Okay, cheers.